everyone, Lauren here with Lauren Elizabeth Fine Art, and I help beginner through professional level artists reduce stress while mastering animal art. So in today's tutorial for stress relief, I'm going to be painting a raven. And while we paint, I'll be talking to you a little bit about how I paint birds. Now I know there's a lot of differences with different bird species, but I'll talk about some common things that I do when I draw and when I paint birds using acrylics. Now, speaking of birds, as of right now when I post this video, my new owlets tier, this will be a new tier in my online Animal Art Masterclass, will be opening up for registration. So this allows creatives to now participate in my monthly Masterclass 10-day challenge every single month, and the tutorials stay up until the following challenge. What this tier really focuses on is not just growing your skills in animal art, but reflection, creative meditation, just processing those negative emotions and feelings that we're just keeping bottled up. I'm hoping this will help a lot of creatives who are really struggling with anxiety, depression, and addiction. So all those links are down below, guys, along with the materials for this tutorial. Let's get started. All right, so I'm going to get started drawing with my paint and paintbrush. If you don't feel comfortable drawing with paint, no worries. You can grab a regular graphite pencil and get started drawing on a plain white canvas. I'm using an 8x10 canvas positioned vertically. Using a small round detail brush, this is a Master's Touch liner brush, I'm going to mix phthalo blue with black. I'm going to water it down just so I can create those shapes a little bit more smoothly on my plain canvas. And I'm going to create 3 shapes. I'm going to create an oval in the center of my canvas that's slightly turning to the right. For the head, I'm going to create a circle. It's better to start small and work out. And then I'm going to connect the bottom half of the bird, an open oval, connected to that first oval we made. And again, this is slightly turning to the right. Now that we have the main shape down for the body and head, this will help me to pinpoint where those wings are. So I'm going to start to create these lines that come down. I might have made them down a little too far, but this is our rough sketch. We can always make adjustments. To help me pinpoint where that beak is, I join the head to the front of the chest, which I extend out just slightly. Using 2 lines, about 1.5 inches or about 1 inch from the front of the head, I create the beak. I'm going to start working my way around the back of the neck where that cluster bundle of feathers are that kind of sits high on the raven's back. Every line I make will help me compare and contrast to other lines I've made. So even if your lines aren't correct now, you can always make tiny tweaks that will help you pinpoint those right proportioned lines. And even so, you can even make adjustments while you're painting as well. So I'm going to round out the bottom, which kind of comes up, as well as the back, which comes down towards the tail. All right, let's work on those legs. Now, birds are unique in that it looks like they have a backward facing knee joint, but surprisingly, they walk on their toes, so that joint is actually their heel. So I'm going to work on what's called the drumstick, and that's the thickest part of the legs. And then it comes down to, like I was saying, the heel, which extends forward, and that's the thinnest part, and that's actually called the foot and ankle of the bird, which leads into the metatarsals or the toes. So those 2 lines come together very narrowly. It's really thin, just right before the toes, and then the thickest point is closest to the body. I'm going to create 2 circles around those heels. That just helps me round that out. And then I'm also going to slightly open up the bottom of the foot where we sort of see a little bit of the start of those toes. Not a whole lot. Our water will pretty much cover up most of that. Now I'm going to extend out that top wing, and now I'm going to start to kind of go off my canvas a little bit. I position the bird a little bit more to the right than I wanted to, but we can work with that. Even if your wings come off the canvas, that's all right. Now we're going to create a line that separates the upper and lower portion of the bird's bill, or beak. Now the mistake that I made here was I made the top portion larger than the bottom. So pay close attention to the bird's beak you're painting because they really come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. But for ravens, the top and bottom will be equal, and then it comes to a point, a really sharp point at the front. And right behind that bill is the eye, which is located behind the upper portion of the beak. And lastly, laying over top those open triangles we made at the bottom of the legs, I'm going to create a horizontal line for the water line. And that's going to go straight across. That line should be even throughout the bottom of the canvas. All right, wonderful. I'm going to move to what's called a large flat brush. Now I put magenta and cadmium yellow on my paint palette. I'm going to use a clean, damp, large flat brush. I'm going to mix those two colors together, and I'm very loosely going to apply this color to the background. I want to keep a more pink, dark pink tone to the upper right-hand side and lower, but then as I move to the left, I'm going to add more yellow and more white to this paint mixture. I'm not trying to make it look perfectly blended. I am trying to intentionally leave spots of color unmixed and brush strokes on my background, but I'm going to do this as I carefully paint the sides and paint around the raven we just drew. Now I like to use this as our warm-up. Take 5 deep breaths in and out and allow this step to just get you warmed up for the rest of the painting. Don't worry about perfection in this painting, not here, not anytime. Just allow yourself to enjoy the process and learn something. Now I hope you're settled in and comfy and you took your 5 deep breaths. I'm going to share some interesting facts about birds' beaks. The bird's beak or bill, like we learned previously in this tutorial, is composed of keratin, the same tough insoluble protein found in our fingernails, in hooves, antlers, and horns. And like fingernails, a parrot's beak is constantly growing. And as the beak grows, it is constantly worn down by feeding, grooming, climbing, and chewing. And a bird's beak has many functions, including gathering and capturing food, communicating, grooming their feathers, defending their territory, and attacking rivals. Now as you finish up your background, just try to prevent any little white spots left over. You want to get as close as you can to the sketch or even over top so that you don't have to remix this color and go back to those little leftover white areas. Now make sure you washed out your brush thoroughly so there's no pink or yellow on it, and dry it off on your cloth or paper towel. And I'm going to pick up phthalo blue and light blue violet. This is a purplish blue color, and I'm going to mix that together so that I create this dark blue value for the right side of the water. And I'm going to work on the right side first, and then as I move to the middle and left, I'm going to add in a little bit more white and a little bit more of my light blue violet. I'm going to do a lot of the mixing on my canvas, and my brush strokes, as you can see, are going back and forth horizontally. All right, great. So now we finished our background. We're going to work on the bird. Now my next tip for you for painting birds is to use a medium to large round brush. This is one of my favorite ways to paint birds just because there are so many layers of feathers. There's a lot of rounded areas and there's a lot of points. And especially in those areas like the beak and when we're painting the feathers, a round brush comes in real handy. So I just mixed up a little bit of black with phthalo blue. I'm not going to use straight blue or straight black. This is kind of like a very dark navy blue. And I'm going to start looking at all the darkest areas. So I'm going to apply my darkest values with this color using my round brush. So if we're looking at that reference photo, we're just going to be laying down the areas that we see black in the raven. So I see a lot of black on the lower part of the body, on both legs, the lower part of the body under the wings, the back of the neck, below the beak, and right in between where the eyes and beak meet. Now another tip I have for painting birds is to use this step to really define those feathers. Birds will often not have one shape and size feather. It's going to be all different shapes and sizes and lengths. And so it's important that you use this step to really define them because they're laying over top one another, creating all these different layers and shadows. So not only is it important to really focus on covering up the white in this step, because we have a lot of white to cover, it's also important to make sure you really specify where those feathers belong. I just want to make a note here, throughout my tutorials, if I don't mention what color I'm mixing, I'm probably just mixing up more of the same color. So I'll make sure I tell you when I'm mixing up a different color. All right, so I'm going to wash on my brush so it's clean and damp. And the next colors I'm going to mix for the next layer is light blue violet with phthalo blue. I still want this to be dark because we want to go gradually from our darks to light. And this is going to be laying over top and hugging next to the layers that we just laid down. And in my reference photo, what values I'm looking for are the ones that are just a little bit lighter than my darkest values. So no longer am I looking for those black areas. I'm kind of looking for those dark blue areas in the reference photo. Make sure you mix up enough of this color. I had to remix it many times. I didn't expect to have to cover all the rest of the white with this color, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to very carefully block in this color, making sure that it's in the right spots, of course, but also creating that base for the next layers that are going to be a little bit lighter. Another little tip I have for painting birds is just why I love to use the round brush so much for painting feathers and birds. So a flat brush is pretty wide. When you push down on it and you're creating straight lines, you're going to create a pretty thick line. But a round brush kind of creates the perfect size and shape that looks like a feather. So I only have to push down on my brush just a little bit and I can get into those tiny little areas in the bird's beak or on the legs, but also create those long, drawn out feathers. So unlike a flat brush, with a round brush I can create those really pointy tips, but also those rounded areas. All right, so this is a very important step because you might think that we're just going to mix an even lighter color for the next layer. Well, actually, a lot of the time when I'm painting birds, I keep going backwards to those darker layers. It's very easy to lose your feathers while painting birds, so I will constantly go back to my darker values, which is this navy blue, the black, and the phthalo blue, and I'll just redefine those feathers and just create that furry, feathery look over and over again, because as you're laying down layers, it's just very easy to lose that definition. And I'm also touching up the beak. I'm also kind of rounding out the bottom portion of the beak to make the top and bottom more equal. The top isn't bigger than the bottom portion actually. It's just the light hitting it that kind of makes it look a little bit bigger. So yes, every time you lay down a layer, just be careful of all those feathers, making sure they're in the right spots. And if not, go backwards to your darker values and just define them a little bit more. Make sure you wash out your brush very thoroughly now. You might even want to change your water a bit because it is so dark. And we're going to start going to those medium to light tones. So I'm going to mix a lot of my light blue violet with a little bit of my phthalo blue. Again, keep that brush clean and damp throughout. We're going to start getting more specific and more detailed with our brush strokes, which is why you don't want to have a lot of thick paint dried to your brush. By now, you might have that because we've been painting for a while, so make sure you wash out your brush and you might even want to get some clean water. So now I'm looking for those areas that look almost like a light gray in the reference photo, but in this case, we're using the same value, but we're using our blues and our purples here instead of like a light gray. You may even see a tint of blue in the reference photo. I certainly do, but some might just see more of a gray color. So I'm just going to kind of dab my brush. I'm, like I said, getting more specific. My brush strokes are also less is more here. I'm not trying to cover up a lot. I'm just trying to capture all those little areas that the light source is hitting. It's really important in this step that you're very intentional with every single brush stroke. We are trying to be specific with where that light source is hitting the feathers. And so if I'm going too fast, feel free to pause and then play again and go back to anything if you missed it. It's just very important to not overwork areas because less is definitely more in this case. Now, one thing I added to this painting that we don't really see in the reference photo are water reflections. I made the water blue and a little bit lighter, and I wanted to get some of those reflections from the water hitting the bottom of the bird. So what I added was a bit of this phthalo blue and light blue violet mixture around the lower half of the bird, as well as the sides of the legs. So on the left side of both legs, I also did little dabs of this color, but I added a little too much, made it a little too light. So then I pulled in some more of my black and phthalo blue, blended that on my canvas just to kind of darken it up a little bit, because I don't want it lighter. I don't want it actually lighter than the lightest values on the bird. Another great way to make your birds look more realistic is to have a range of round brushes. As you work from the darks to lights, I'm going to go from large round brushes to more small detail round brushes. Does this make sense? So we started with a medium to large round brush, and now moving to a liner brush. This is also a round detail brush. And I'm going in with my lighter colors now, basically just my light blue violet with the tiniest bit of phthalo blue. And I'm going to really start pulling out those lightest highlights that we see where the light is hitting the most on the raven. Now, once again, I don't want to lose that definition and just those curved and straight lines for the feathers. So I'm going to go back to my dark values of black and navy blue in this case, and I'm going to just define them. It's also very important that you define that beak. There is a separation line that separates the top portion of the beak from the bottom. And I'm also using this small detail brush to get that really pointy tip of the beak and keeping the bottom portion equal to the top. I'm just kind of rounding out the bottom portion a little bit more so that it's equal in size and it curves just the same. Going back to what I was mentioning before about going back to the dark values over and over again, I think that's where a lot of artists struggle with birds, is because they're painting in the feathers, but they're just continuing to go from dark to light. And it's very easy to get those shadows off. You really want to be careful about defining each feather because they are laying over top one another, creating lots and lots of shadows and layers. And so you want to keep the line straight, but also the ends rounded. And so it's so important to just go back and define those with your dark values. All right, so here I go with my lightest values. I'm going to use light blue violet, that's it, maybe even add a little bit of white, doing lots of little tiny dabs. I'm really utilizing the tip of my brush now, trying to get those tiny little feathers. It almost has like a furry look around the back of the neck. Those tiny feathers on the back that lead into a little bit longer, larger feathers towards the mid and bottom area of the bird. But those areas on the back are getting more light than the ones on the bottom. So that's where I'm going to focus my attention now, as well as the top of that beak and just around the neck. And again, I wash out my brush and I go back to my dark values, just kind of touching up those areas, those tiny little feathers on the back. They probably gave me the most struggle in this painting. I had a little bit of trouble making sure that they were small, but not too like big and blobby looking. I wanted to make them look more layered, and that challenged me with this painting. All right, so we're still not done with those navy blue tones with our phthalo blue and black, because now with a small flat brush, I'm going to be applying this below the bird in the water. It's going to just be a little reflection, the shadows being created by the bird over top the water. Now, pay close attention to my technique here. I'm using the flat edge of my flat brush while going from left to right. Kind of little dabs here, little lines clustered together. Some are kind of filled in, some are just lines that are layered over top. And it goes only about an inch, maybe a half inch in front of the raven. I don't want to go out too far because the light, I want to keep the left side of my canvas a little bit lighter, which is why I'm going to mix some of my light blue violet and white for those highlights using the same technique on the left side of the water now. Now here's where I go back and I use some of my white and light blue violet highlights, the ones I used in the water, and I just pull some of that in to the legs and just the lower part of the body. Just tiny little dabs. I'm using the corner of my flat brush now just to create these little dabs and lines. But I'm not adding too many, just a little bit of the light getting reflected from the water. All right, so I really enjoyed this part. We do these little leafless twigs and branches in the back behind the raven. Now you're welcome to add leaves, but I actually decided to kind of make this more of a winter scene. Of course, no snow, but kind of like spring is coming and there's just no leaves on the branches, which is kind of like it is right now. And so I mixed black and raw sienna, and with a round brush, the same brush I was using for the majority of the raven, and I'm going to create lots of little branches that are all connected to one another, and I'm just going to have them span out to the edges of my canvas. Some are not going to go all the way, but most of them are just going to go off the sides of my canvas. All right, so now it's important that you thoroughly wash out your brush. We're going to use much lighter colors now. I'm going to use my cadmium yellow and orange with a little bit of white. And I'm going to start creating a sun behind the upper right-hand branch. The upper right-hand side, behind that branch, I'm going to create a sunshine. Now, I ended up redoing this area because I didn't like that branch in front of the sun. You're welcome to keep it, but I actually ended up going back with my magenta, covering this up once it dried, and then redoing it just without the branch. I just kept the sunshine with lots of my oranges, whites, and my yellows. Now, while I let that upper right-hand side dry before redoing it, I actually added highlights to all the twigs. I mixed up raw sienna and black, and I created these little highlights over all the insides of the branches, especially facing the sun. All right, so here's where I go over back with my flat brush, a large flat brush, and I just redo that upper right hand corner just like I mentioned, mixing in a little bit of my yellow and white just to kind of make that blend a little bit better. And what that did was it actually made me want to pull out the yellows in the lower left hand side of the painting. So once I did this, I also pulled out some more, just adding another layer to my background in those lighter yellowish areas in the lower left hand side. And then once that's done, I move on to that sunshine. And it's really nice because this actually blends the yellows and the oranges blend in with those magentas. So it kind of creates that color that we created below the raven, that orange. That's just such a beautiful, vibrant orange. And I really enjoyed that. So if you want to add in a little bit of magenta into the sunshine to give it that orange tone, by all means do that. And then I outlined the outside of the sunshine with a little bit of white, just to really bring out and make that sunshine pop over top those dark pinks. All right, friends, I really appreciate you watching this. I really hope that it was helpful and hopefully it inspires you to paint more birds using acrylics. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. But guys, I'll see you next week for another animal painting tutorial for stress relief. Bye!